Once upon a time, universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education in Nigeria carried out research on their own without any hope that the product of that research would ever see the light of day.
Industrialists, when they have their own problems, in most cases, they go outside to look for solutions.
Nigerian industries also did the same and relied upon research from outside the country, much of which didn't necessarily translate into solutions at home. But this is all changing thanks to the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, which has initiated a paradigm shift towards research and development. These are the chronicles of the journey towards the institutionalization of research and development in Nigeria.
I believe this will impact the manufacturing sector and in fact the industry as a whole in many, many important ways. First of all, I believe that the long identified problem of the dichotomy between academia, particularly research and development activities going on there, and what goes on in industry. This provides an opportunity for that gap to be bridged.
Hello, I am Stanley Bentu, and welcome to this edition of TETFund, The Paradigm Shift. Now, the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, the federal government's foremost intervention agency for public tertiary education, is devoted to ensuring that research and development is institutionalized, not just in higher education, but in all aspects of the national economy. Let's listen to the Executive Secretary, Professor Suleiman Elias Bogoro, as he makes the case.
Quite a journey, I must say. The idea of focusing on R&D as a priority area for the academia that our law permits us to fund from TETFund started in 2014. And I wrote, the Board of Trustees asked me to articulate my vision for 5 years as Executive Secretary of TETFund. And I wrote a 6-pointer. And, one of the 6 pillars of my vision was the institutionalization of R&D in Nigeria beyond the academia. And it was supposed to be, we thought, at the level of TETFund. Somebody would ask, why bother about picking on an area of amongst the many out there? And it was very simple. At TETFund, we have the mandate by law of the organization to intervene in priority areas that will improve teaching and learning, quality of education, etc., etc. And since the educational institutions, being the public ones, specifically universities, federal, state, polytechnics, federal, state, colleges of education, federal, state, have very clear priorities, being teaching, research, and community development. It was very, very clear that we needed to know what are the priority interventions consistent with the expectations of the client. And I think that is when, for me, that is the year, of course, I was barely a month or 2 in office as Executive Secretary of TETFund, 2014, when this happened. And for me, I reflected over what I know obtains, for instance, in the university system where I operated, and I still operate anyway, as a professor. And I realized that we have a major problem. Major problem being we are not prioritizing research enough. We tend to have been emphasizing teaching of course, at the expense of research. And I insist that one shapes, defines, and strengthens the other. Definitely it is research that shapes, strengthens, and defines teaching. If you are teaching and you are not improving courtesy of research, either through pedagogic skills, etc., then the quality of teaching and communication of knowledge diminishes. And that is the idea of my deciding on promoting the institutionalization of R&D, and there were actually supposed to be two levels. One, even emphasizing research in the university system, of course, as well as polytechnics and colleges of education, was important. But beyond that, I noticed a clear weakness in the Nigerian environment, being that the academia was much less concerned about establishing partnership, reaching out to industry.
But why is this so? The answer to this question is visible when you track the success of nations around the world. Investment in research and development, or R&D as it's popularly known, is the lifeblood of many private sector organizations, helping to bring new products and services to the market. It's also important to national economies, and it plays a crucial role in GDP growth. At the opening of the World Economic Forum's Pioneers of Change Summit, Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank, said that as we recover from the pandemic, R&D will play a key role in underpinning private sector growth and job creation. Let's take a look.
The World Bank analyzed the most recent available data on which countries spend the largest proportion of GDP on R&D activities. While the data predates the pandemic, it helps shine a light on how funding research can bolster economic competitiveness. The top 5 countries are Israel, South Korea, Switzerland, Sweden, and Japan. Here is a summary of the top 3 nations on the World Bank's list. Israel. In 2018, Israel spent 4.9% of GDP on R&D, according to the World Bank. One of its most important economic sectors is technology. Its tech sector benefits from an influx of skilled, educated engineers and technicians who moved there in the early 90s, according to the OECD. South Korea. Between 1960 and 2019, South Korea recorded GDP growth averaging 7.3% per year. Much like Israel, the country has a booming tech industry. It also has a large defense sector, its border with North Korea being one of the most heavily militarized places in the world. As well as impressive GDP growth, South Korea's exports have been healthy too, growing by an average of 16% per year between 1961 and 2019. It spent 4.8% of GDP on R&D in 2018, according to the World Bank data. The data for Switzerland relates to 2017, when the landlocked European country spent 3.4% of GDP on R&D. The services sector is by far the biggest Swiss economic engine, generating almost 3/4 of total GDP. By comparison, agriculture is worth around just 1%, with the rest coming from industry. Switzerland's main export market is the European Union. While not a member of the EU, it is party to a number of treaties that allow it to trade freely with EU nations. Among its main industrial sectors are pharmaceuticals, and of course, watches, which keep 9% of exports ticking along. Larger economies are lagging behind. The world's 2 largest economies, the US and China, are ranked at numbers 9 and 13 respectively on the World Bank's list. Both figures are based on 2018 data. Europe's largest economy, Germany, comes in 7th, with 3% of GDP dedicated to R&D in 2018. One of Europe's other large economies, the UK, which has decided to leave the European Union, is ranked 21st by the World Bank. Just 1.7% of GDP went towards R&D in the same year.
Now, it's clear that innovation plays a vital role in helping to shape national economic growth, and that in turn, because natural resources simply do not make a country rich. The major exports of the world's richest countries are refined products, goods, and services, while the poorest countries are heavily reliant on natural resources. To illustrate this a little more clearly, let's say that we have 4 children. One has a jug of water, the second has some sugar, and the third some lemons. The 4th child buys the water for 10 naira. He then buys sugar for 5 naira and lemons for another 5 naira. He has spent a total of 20 naira, while the other 3 kids have gained 5 naira each. But the 4th child combines the water, sugar, and lemons to make some delicious lemonade. So cool and refreshing. He then sells it back to the 3 other children at 20 naira each. Ultimately, after investing a total of 20 naira, the 4th child earns a total of 60 naira from his 3 friends. The 3 friends love the lemonade, and so they look for and sell more water, lemons, and sugar to their friend so that they can buy more lemonade. But with each jug of water, or pound of sugar, or bowl of lemons that they sell, they lose 15 naira. This is why natural resource-rich countries get poorer and poorer, while industrial countries get richer and richer. It all comes down to economic complexity, which is driven by research and development that enables a nation to add value to its products of comparative advantage. Based on these facts, TETFund has keyed into a strategic plan of tilting its sponsorship of academic staff for PhDs and postdoctorate degrees towards science-based courses. This is what TETFund wants Nigeria to achieve through the triple helix model, a set of interactions between the academia, that's universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education, with the industry and government to foster economic and social development.
In 2019, Nigeria was the 25th economy in the world in terms of GDP, the 142nd economy in terms of GDP per capita, and the 133rd most complex economy, the lowest in the world, according to the Economic Complexity Index. The Economic Complexity Index is a holistic measure of the productive capabilities of large economic systems, usually cities, regions, or countries. Higher economic complexity as compared to the country's income level drives economic development. Many low-income countries, including Bangladesh, Venezuela, and Angola, have failed to diversify their know-how and face low growth prospects. Others like India, Turkey, and the Philippines successfully added productive capabilities to enter new sectors and will drive growth over the coming years. The top exports of Nigeria are crude petroleum, $46 billion, petroleum gas at $7.7 billion, scrap vessels at $2.3 billion, flexible metal tubing at $2.1 billion, and cocoa beans at $715 million, exporting mostly to India, Spain, the United States, France, and Ghana. The top imports of Nigeria are refined petroleum at $10 billion, cars at $1.6 billion, wheat at $1.5 billion, laboratory glassware at $1.5 billion, and packaged medicaments at $1.3 billion, importing mostly from China, the Netherlands, India, the United States, and Belgium.
By introducing this output-based or outcome-based education, by introducing this outcome-based research and development, you are already creating an environment whereby industry can actually find the output of the education as well as the outcome of the research and development of immediate value, and therefore should be able to invest in it. So clearly this should significantly help to provide more funding directly from industry, because it will not just be charity again. It will not be corporate social responsibility. It will be an investment that every industry needs to make so that it will grow. It will be an investment every industry may need to make so that it can solve its own operational problems that arise on a day-to-day basis. For instance, if you have an industry, let's say a refining industry, that is now having to import something that they call catalysts, for instance. Now, catalyst is about 80% basically sand, rock. But because of the way it is made, because of the way it is processed and prepared, it has tremendous value. As of today, our refining industry is just having to import it at tremendous cost. But we have the basic raw material to make catalyst. And therefore, if we can work between industry and academia together with the government support and government funding and government assistance, we can actually make catalysts, whether specifically for our industries or general catalysts that we can also not only use but also sell. So that's the kind of arrangement that will increase the funding of university education, the funding of R&D tremendously by this contribution from R&D. So it's no longer just handouts from industry or from private sector to support education or to support R&D. It is now paying for the output of these institutions because I need them. It is now investing in the work of academia, in the work of these researchers, because I believe at the end of the day, I will benefit from the output of this work. And I believe this is one way in which the R&D, the funding of R&D can be literally transformed. But this is not to say that R&D should only be industry driven. I think there's some basic R&D that universities ought to make, because part of the value of R&D is not just to produce tomorrow's products, but also to expand the scope of knowledge, to push the boundaries of knowledge. And that literally is something that the government needs to have to fund, because today everybody accepts we are in a knowledge-driven industry.
TETFund has identified that the most competitive nations have the best educational system with a bias for science and technology. TETFund is committed to ensure a coordinated national framework for the sustenance and implementation of R&D. The logical institutional arrangement will require the establishment of the National R&D Foundation, which shall be responsible for the promotion and implementation of R&D policy on a regulatory rather than an executory basis. Such a foundation, when established by law, shall promote an effective interface between research centers or tertiary institutions, the government, and the private sector, especially the industrial subsector of the economy.
TETFund, the university and research institutes have been and remain the apex of knowledge generation worldwide. With knowledge, jobs and wealth are created, poverty is mitigated, and global competitiveness is enhanced. Rapid advances in economic development and human development index have become knowledge-based, private sector-led, S&T-driven, and mainly government-facilitated via appropriate policy instruments. Recent PSIA study of 65 countries by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development shows a correlation between educational performance of students in a country and total earnings of the same country derived from natural resources such as oil, gold, and diamonds. The study gives insight into extant issues. Countries blessed with natural resources are jinxed with what has been termed the natural curse or Dutch disease. This is because countries caught in the lamentable vortex burgeoning natural resources almost never go into manufacturing or innovative technology.
I made a case first in TETFund. How do we proceed? The strategy to institutional R&D was TETFund does not have a department for R&D. Why don't we have it? And I said, to do that, let us tie it to centers of excellence. That is the issue of quality. Quality of segments, of parts of activities in a university or anywhere else. That's what a center of excellence is. So we decided let there be, I made a case of the 6-point pillar articulated. I requested for creation of R&D and Centers of Excellence department. And thank God, as we talk today, it came to be. Well, the board was happy to approve, but they approved 100% of all that I asked for. And that is how R&D Center of Excellence department came. And somebody would ask, oh, why is TETFund concerned? Yeah, we are concerned because, let me say this, some people have said, well, TETFund is doing some things that maybe you thought NUC, NBT, NCC are supposed to be doing. And I said, hey, do you want us to just be putting money anywhere? It is wrong. We must put money in the right place. So we, by the law of TETFund, NUC, NBT, NCC are members of the board. That's their chief executive, being the executive secretaries of these three institutions. They are members of the board of trustees of TETFund, so that they guide us. Together we sit with them. They are the ones that guide us. They regulate and give policy direction to the beneficiary institutions that we fund. So we need to hear them. And today I can tell you, we're working exceptionally close with the National Universities Commission, NBTE, NCCE, in many areas. NCCE, for instance, come and say, look, TETFund should support, put some money on the teaching practice. We've been doing that. The polytechnics, hey, let's have some money on fabrications. We've been doing that, as well as, what do you call it? Enterprise, entrepreneurship, as it were, for both universities and polytechnics. I mean, we listen to the regulators and we are guided. So that is how TETFund has naturally been involved. As we are talking now, we have a capacity building training for grant writing skills because we identified in liaison with the regulatory agencies that there is very poor capacity for writing quality research grants by lecturers. And that is not good news. It couldn't be. And so TETFund is putting money, and beyond that, we each time during the trainings, we also globalize the whole environment operating in the campuses. What are our priorities? What are we discussing? Are we discussing in ourselves more of the issues being discussed in the National Assembly, or looking at the larger picture of the problem that we can, through research, solve the problem? And that is how we move forward. Well, I was, of course, disengaged for 3 years, and massively, Mr. President, upon recommendation of the Honorable Minister of Education, returned me to this same office. And since then, where there were, for instance, the R&D Department, Center of Excellence, the name was tinkered with, of course, I went back to the drawing board.
Nigeria can reverse all paradoxical indices of development through the institutionalization and support of R&D. TETFund has decided to play its role in this regard through partnership with tertiary institutions, research centers, and regulatory agencies, as well as the private sector. And that is the paradigm shift. Join us again next time. Until then, thank you for stopping by.